Have you ever thought about how a world-changing idea could just get lost? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of a scientific breakthrough that was published, completely ignored, and then rediscovered decades later, basically creating an entire field of science from scratch. And it all kicks off with this one sentence.
So, picture this. The year is 1900. You've got 3 different scientists in 3 different countries. They don't know each other, but they are all on the verge of announcing the exact same revolutionary discovery about how life passes down its traits.
But, and this is where it gets crazy, as each one of them does their homework, checking the old scientific literature, they all stumble across the same obscure paper. A paper that had just been sitting there, totally unnoticed, for 35 years. And it had everything they thought they had just discovered themselves. This sets up one of the most unique moments in the history of science. You see, this wasn't a race between living rivals trying to one-up each other. This was a race that had already been won by a ghost more than 3 decades earlier. And these are the guys: De Vries, Correns, and Tschermak. Each of them, working completely independently, had figured out the fundamental rules of heredity, and each one was about to have their mind blown. So what do you do in that situation? I mean, really, think about it. Do you try to fudge it and claim the discovery as your own? No. In what's been called one of the glories of scientific history, all 3 men did the exact opposite. They abandoned their own claims to fame and instead told the world about the man who had beaten them to it, Gregor Mendel. So who on earth was this Gregor Mendel? He wasn't some famous professor at a big-name university. Nope, he was a monk from a pretty humble background who lived a quiet life in a monastery in what is now the Czech Republic. But Mendel had a kind of secret weapon, this unique combination of 2 passions. He didn't just love gardening and observing his plants, he also had a sharp mind for statistics. So when he looked at his garden, he didn't just see flowers and leaves, he saw data, he saw patterns. For 8 years, Mendel meticulously grew thousands of pea plants. He started by figuring out which of his plants bred true. Now, this is a really key concept. It just means that when he let a dwarf pea plant pollinate itself, it only produced more dwarf pea plants, generation after generation. It was consistent. The same went for some of his tall plants. So, once he had these pure, true-breeding plants, he was ready to ask the big question. What happens when you start to mix them? He was about to unlock the hidden rules that govern how you and I inherit our traits. His experiment was just beautifully simple. First, he crossed his true-breeding tall plants with the true-breeding dwarf plants. The result? Every single one of the offspring was tall. Not kinda tall, not in between, all tall. And then, the critical step, he let those new tall hybrid plants pollinate themselves. And this led to the central mystery of the whole thing. Where did the dwarf trait go? It's like it just vanished. Poof, gone. Now, for any other gardener, that probably would have been the end of the story. But not for Mendel. So he takes those new tall hybrids and lets them self-pollinate. And in the next generation, bam! The dwarf trait came back. But it didn't just come back randomly. It reappeared in a stunningly consistent mathematical pattern. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 dwarf plant. A perfect 3-to-1 ratio. That ratio, that was the key. Mendel realized he wasn't looking at traits that just blended together. No, this was more like a competition, where one trait could win out over another. And this idea became his first law of inheritance. He called the trait for tallness dominant. This was the characteristic that would always show up if it was in the mix. It basically masked the other trait. And he called the trait for dwarfness recessive. And here's the crucial insight. The trait wasn't gone. It was just hidden, laying low, waiting for a chance to reappear when it wasn't being overshadowed by a dominant trait. But that 3-to-1 ratio was just what you could see on the surface. When Mendel looked closer, the hidden genetic truth was even cooler. A quarter of the plants were true-breeding dwarf, another quarter were true-breeding tall, and a full half, 50%, looked tall but were actually hybrids, just like their parents, still carrying that hidden recessive gene. And this was the revolution. Before Mendel, everyone just assumed traits blended together, like mixing paint. Mendel proved that characteristics are inherited as these distinct, separate units. Some just get expressed, while others are carried silently. So after Mendel published these incredible findings back in 1865, What happened? Well, for a very long time, absolutely nothing. But his real legacy was just waiting to be born.
I mean, this timeline is just kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? He was an amateur scientist, he published in a small journal, and basically no one important paid any attention. He died in 1884 with absolutely no idea that his patient work in a monastery garden was about to change the world forever.
But after 1900, the science he founded, which we now call genetics, just exploded. Today, his principles help doctors predict inherited diseases. They help anthropologists trace ancient human history through our genes. Entire fields of biochemistry are built on his ideas. Nobel Prizes have been awarded for work that stands directly on his shoulders. All of it from one man patiently growing pea plants. Mendel's story is such a powerful reminder. It proves that a revolutionary idea can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't new at all. They're just sitting there in an old journal, waiting for the right person to find them again. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else is out there just waiting to be rediscovered?